On the morning of November 18th, 2019, 26-year-old Marshal Iwaasa left a storage unit that he rented in Lethbridge, Alberta. He had spent a little over 2 hours there, and then he seemingly disappeared. 5 days later, his Sierra pickup truck is found mysteriously burned 14 hours away in another province. Marshal has not been seen or heard from since November 18th, and his loved ones are left with so many unanswered questions. How did his truck end up where it did, and why? Was he alone or was somebody else? And what happened to Marshal Iwaasa? Hello and welcome to another episode of Truly Twisted. As always, I'm your host, Alicia Watson, and every Thursday I bring you a story that is always victim-focused and fact-based. Thank you so much for tuning in each week. It really does mean the world to me. Remember, if you're enjoying the show, to please leave me 5 stars wherever you are listening now. It really is the best way to help me reach new audiences. Now let's get into this week's story. Marshal Iwaasa was born on January 3rd, 1993 in Lethbridge, Alberta, to parents Perry and Tammy. He also had an older sister named Paige, who he was incredibly close with. Paige described her brother as quiet, reserved, gentle, and kind. In an interview with Unsolved Canada, she said, "I used to joke when we were little that I had sucked up all the aggression in the womb before he was born, because I was way more assertive than he was." Growing up, the whole family enjoyed being outdoors, and they camped often. Marshal also played football and rugby and was into fitness and bodybuilding. And he had a group of close friends that he kept in elementary school, high school, and right into adulthood. Paige said that they all grew up together, being from this small community in southern Lethbridge. While in high school, Marshal worked at a local grocery store, but as he got older, he started doing more manual labor jobs around Alberta. Alberta is known for its oil and gas industry, so manual labor jobs on power lines and rigs are common for young men living there, and it's not bad money. But Marshal was really smart and more interested in computers and IT than anything labor-intensive. Before he disappeared, he had just started at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology in Calgary. As they grew into adulthood, Paige had moved to Hawaii with her husband, but their family stayed incredibly close, going to visit her each Christmas. The only thing that the Iwaasa family loved more than camping was Christmas. Each year, they went all out, decorating ugly Christmas sweaters, painting ornaments. Really, anything corny and holiday-related, they were in. Plus, Paige and Marshal had a birthday around the same time, a week apart in the holidays, so it gave them that much more of a reason to celebrate. In the summer of 2019, Paige had come home to visit, and the family did a camping trip across the border in Montana. When Paige moved to Hawaii, she had gotten a storage unit for some of her stuff that she shared with Marshal. She had left him a few things to bring next time he was there. And the unit held bigger items that Paige couldn't bring to Hawaii, family keepsakes and albums from growing up, and a ton of camping and outdoor gear, plus a lot of Christmas decorations. Throughout the summer, Marshal's family noticed that any time the topic of school or Calgary came up as his first semester neared, he would change the subject or say things like, quote, "In my field, sometimes you don't need a degree. It's about who you know and your experience." They were starting to wonder if he was having second thoughts about going to school or thinking about opportunities elsewhere. They didn't push it, and they knew he would talk about it when he was ready, but he would end up going. It was just something to note before he disappeared. Something else to note was that Marshal's stress levels were notably higher. He seemed more on edge than he usually did as summer turned to fall in 2019. The only stress that his family could think of was what he was experiencing at school and maybe adjusting to living in another place away from home in Calgary. He was usually a very private person and quiet, but he talked to Paige about pretty much everything. Looking at it now, though, his family is wondering if maybe his stresses were more financial, as they learned that he had never registered for his next semester after he was reported missing. Marshal rented a basement suite in Calgary while he was going to school in the fall of 2019. On Sunday, November 17th, Marshal cleaned up his home and did laundry during the day, and then that evening he went back to his home in Lethbridge to help his mom, Tammy, with some computer problems that she was having. At 11 p.m., Marshall left Lethbridge, noting that he was going to go to their storage unit nearby and pick up a few things before heading back to his place in Calgary. Marshall arrived at the storage unit at around 11:30 p.m., and according to the activity log, there were numerous attempts to get into the storage facility. The code was tried multiple times with breaks in between. Page didn't think that he was expecting the storage facility to be closed, but we knew that whatever Marshall was there to get, he was willing to wait for it. At 6 a.m., Marshall gained access to the storage unit and stayed until about 8:30. These are the last confirmed movements of Marshal Iwaasa. According to Page, nothing was missing from the unit, including his camping gear, which was what was taken and brought back most often. There is no video footage of Marshall's 2009 Blue Sierra GMC truck leaving the area where the storage unit was located either. For 5 days, Marshall's movements would remain a mystery. But then on November 23rd, his truck would be found mysteriously burned near Pemberton, British Columbia. Now, Pemberton is about 12 to 14 hours away, depending on the route that you take. Where Marshall's truck was found was near the shores of Long Lake, north of Pemberton, in an incredibly remote area. There's a logging hut there called Brying Wadington that sleeps about 40 people. And it's about 15 to 20 kilometers from any main roads. And the trail that goes in is about a 2-hour hike from the main road. The road in is slick with gravel, mud, potholes, and creeks. You would need a 4-wheel drive to get up there, and it's not findable on a GPS. My point is, this isn't somewhere you would end up on accident. A group of hikers was approaching the trailhead on November 23rd when they came across Marshall's truck. The group reported their discovery to police, and BC RCMP spent 2 days attempting to access the site, damaging one of their cruisers in the process. Like I said, it's a very, very remote mountain area. The hikers were instructed to take careful photos of the scene in the meantime. At the scene were scattered clothing and various items, including gaming consoles and 3 smashed phones. It also appears that parts of Marshall's truck had been stripped for parts before they were burned. James Stark, one of the hikers, was leading a group that was registered to stay at the logging hut that evening, and reported the site with the truck being very eerie. The Iwaasa family knew no reason that Marshall would have gone to or be in Pemberton, especially somewhere that remote. And according to the family, there were no connections there. Marshall's sister Paige and their mom Tammy received the call that his truck had been found on November 26th. Tammy was in Hawaii visiting at the time, and they both quickly made plans to get back to Lethbridge. Marshall was reported as missing right away. Marshall had recently finished paying off his truck, and he loved it, so if it was stolen, he would have reported it right away. And during that 14-hour drive, the truck would have needed gas, and there's no movement on Marshall's bank accounts past November 15th, making the family wonder if he wasn't the one driving it, or if at the very least he wasn't alone. Even if Marshall did pay in cash, in the months following his disappearance, his face was all over Canada, and he was a memorable guy with tons of tattoos. Somebody would have remembered serving him. Now, there are 4 routes that you could possibly take from Lethbridge to where Marshall's truck was found outside of Pemberton. And strangely, there isn't any CCTV footage anywhere between November 18th, when he would have left the storage facility, and November 23rd, when the truck was discovered, of Marshall or his truck driving any of these routes. In the early days of the investigation, police and the family pled with people to review any private surveillance for Marshall's truck, but nothing was ever reported. The United States border was quickly notified of Marshall's disappearance, and it was confirmed that he had never legally crossed the border in the time since he went missing. Page took note of the items that Marshall would have had with him versus what was missing from his Calgary home. Initially, she thought that the gaming consoles left at the scene were Marshall's, but she later confirmed that those were actually still in his house. Of the missing items confirmed were his contact lenses, his contact solution, a Mountain Hardwear Scrambler 30 backpack, his SAIT-issued Samsung laptop, his wallet believed to be a Nixon wallet with a screen spot for the license, and his most recent cell phone, a pearl-colored Samsung Galaxy S6. None of these items have ever been recovered or reported at any local pawn shops. The items found at the scene, along with Marshal's truck, have been preserved by the RCMP, but they've never been tested for DNA, and the owners of the items remain unknown. The spot is incredibly remote, and it's possible that they're not related to Marshal at all and were just dumped there. Although it is suspected that some of the clothing items were related to Marshal. Marshal's family notes discrepancies in where the items were in the photos taken by the hikers versus the photos taken by the RCMP 2 days later. It would have been impossible to secure that scene for 2 days. So who was in there? Even if there is DNA, is it even related to Marshal's disappearance? Over the following weeks, extensive searches were conducted by Marshal's family, the BC RCMP, and private investigators with no sign of Marshal or his missing items. And by December 4th, all searches were put on pause due to winter weather. Later that same month, the BC RCMP turned over the investigation to the Lethbridge Police. On November 3rd, 2020, what would have been Marshal's 27th birthday, the family held a candlelit vigil for him. By the end of January, ground searches continued in and around Lethbridge, starting at the storage facility. Drones, search dogs, and search and rescue teams were used, but they had no idea what path Marshal actually took, or why. On May 21st, cadaver dogs were brought into the truck site, but still no traces were found. Marshal's family was able to search the truck site themselves in July of 2020 when the community donated 4x4s for them to use. But it still took over 30 hours for them to get up there, and they weren't able to find any trace of Marshal either. Police say an investigation of the vehicle and the area at the time offered, quote, no evidence to suggest a criminal offense had been committed, and no evidence to suggest that anyone other than Iwaasa was present when the vehicle was burned, end quote. This remains hard for the family to believe, and that a criminal investigation needs to be done. They have been petitioning to have the case type changed since Marshal disappeared. Sadly, Marshal's dad, Perry, died in 2001 without him ever knowing what happened to his son. And Paige and Tammy remain advocates for Marshal's case and continue to fight for a criminal investigation and advocate for him. One big misstep in the investigation is the lack of fire report and the cause of fire and duration of the time. How is that not a criminal investigation? He wouldn't just drive 14 hours to burn his own truck and then disappear. All of the photos provided by the family just cement the heaviness of this case. The emptiness that they feel without Marshal there in their world. He seemed like a very sweet young man, close with his friends, his family, smart. It just doesn't make any sense, and I can only imagine how frustrated his family has felt, how hopeless. And I hope that they get the answers they deserve soon. Marshal Iwaasa is described as 5'11", approximately 170 pounds, with brown eyes and brown shoulder-length curly hair. His truck is a dark blue 4-door 2009 GMC Sierra with the Alberta license plate BLL1099. If you have any information about Marshal's whereabouts, his disappearance, or you have any helpful video footage of Marshal or his truck from November of 2019 that could help identify his movements, please contact Crime Stoppers or the Lethbridge Police. The Lethbridge Police is 403-328-4444, and Crime Stoppers is 1-800-222-8477. Share this episode, share Marshal's story, share his photo, follow his family's Facebook group, and be on the lookout if you live in the areas. And I will post as many close-up photos of Marshal's tattoos as possible on this episode post as well on Instagram, so be sure to follow me there. And I'm going to leave us here for this week's episode. In the meantime, remember, you are wanted, you are loved, and you deserve to be here. And I will see you next week for a brand new case.